at an earlier spot because Kurt loves getting up early out there in the LA area. So Ira Winderman here from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com. And, well, for my schedule, we grab you in the middle of a back-to-back set. The Heat with an impressive victory last night over the Golden State Warriors at FTX Arena. They're back at home tonight against another team they recently lost to, the Sacramento Kings, without De'Aaron Fox, and that matters. So I think the Heat, by the end of the week, the sky's falling on the Heat. Win tonight against Sacramento, win Friday in Indiana. You're a 500 team. You're coming home to play Portland, consecutive games against Charlotte, and all of a sudden, the world's not ending. And I want to bring in Kurt with this. Kurt, when you look at some teams' early season records, I think they're an indicator of trouble ahead. When you look at other teams' early season struggles, you say to yourself, they're too good for that. They'll get it together. And I thought both teams yesterday that left FTX Arena with that 3-5 record, the Miami Heat and the Golden State Warriors, are going to be fine. There's too much talent there for them not to be. The Heat will be in the middle to upper pack in the East playoff race. The Golden State Warriors give me no reason not to believe otherwise. Kurt, when you watched that game last night and you see where these two teams are right now, are there any specifics that, whether it's the Heat or whether it's the Warriors, you're looking, you say, you know what? 3-5 portends trouble because?
Not in the regular season, no. I think the Warriors rightfully should be a little worried about the play they're getting from their young kids. I mean, they were leaning into Wiseman and they're leaning into Kuminga. By the way, I don't know what you thought. Moody's good. Like, I'm starting to trust Moses Moody. He had some shots last night. But they're leaning on those kids to play the minutes that went to Otto Porter, that went to Gary Payton Jr., who proved himself last year. And they haven't stepped up on that level yet. And I think it's with the Heat, it's more, doesn't it just feel like there were just changes, right? Like you're leaning heavy into Caleb Martin. And then last night it was just really, I mean, Tyler Hero didn't play much because of the eye situation, but they need the threes to fall, don't they? Like the threes fall.
You know what, but Kurt, that's related. And I wanted to get into that. And it was my Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com this morning. Is that a coincidence that Tyler Hero went out in the second quarter and you can make an argument that he played arguably their best 30-minute stretch of the season when Tyler was out? Why? Because the ball was popping. Tyler Hero gets his threes a lot of times off the bounce and is off in his own creation. So it's Tyler doing his thing and then sort of everyone else watching. And again, as a creative scorer, he's as good as they have. But everyone else is on the side. All of a sudden yesterday, Tyler goes out. There's no definitive go-to guy until closing time with Jimmy. The ball is popping. And all of a sudden you say, hey, wait a minute. Isn't that Duncan Robinson? And hey, wait a minute. Isn't that Max Strus continuing to do it? And you saw so much more of the previous Miami Heat, of what we thought this team was and was going to be. And I find it interesting, and we spoke about this last week, Kurt, here also on redrecover.com, Inside the Paint. The Golden State Warriors gave Poole a large contract, Jordan Poole a large contract, and he still comes off the bench. And he comes off the bench because they have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andrew Wiggins, and feel they need a big and Kevon Looney, and generally it has worked to championship levels. The Heat gave Tyler Hero the big extension that kicks in next season and felt, hey, at this price point, $120 million guaranteed, $130 million possible, he's got to be a starter. We've set him up that way. Did the Heat make a mistake, Kurt? And again, we're getting into player ego, you want to keep your players happy. Would the Heat have been better off keeping Tyler Hero in his sixth-man award role where he positively thrived better than any of his previous career seasons? Or is this simply the move you have to make with an NBA player, that they want to take the next step, and if you don't start him, they'll feel like you're holding him back?
I think it's more the latter. I think you have to, but I think the thing that can come out of that is if these struggles continue a little bit, if the offense doesn't pop, like you say, like it's just not, like you said, it's not flowing right. And part of it is that Jimmy kind of creates for himself, and he can pass, but Jimmy kind of creates for himself, and Kyle Lowry kind of creates for himself. And suddenly you're right. Like you've got three guys who aren't necessarily, the ball's not flying around quite the same way. Sometimes players need to see it, right? Like I get, hey, Tyler Hero, whatever he was getting paid, wanted to start. Like he said he said it before he signed the contract. He said it last season after last season ended, right? Like he wants to be there. Maybe he needs to see that situation. Hey, it worked better as a team. My numbers were better coming off the bench. Maybe that's just a better situation for us. It's a little different, I think, for Jordan Poole because Klay Thompson's not Klay Thompson yet, and you're starting Klay.
Like he will be Klay Thompson, right?
And he has earned that spot right now, right? Like you're not sitting him. So there was, I think, less of a. I bet Jordan Poole would love to start, but he can read the room.
Read the room, yeah. He can be a realist. So when we hear teams all the time, though, this is the thing: is the Heat talk about their culture. They talk about they're different than everybody. They're talking about an all-in buy-in. And the word we constantly hear from Eric Spoelstra is sacrifice.
Yeah.
And yet it seems that the players who want something aren't necessarily going to sacrifice. Bam Adebayo has wanted more shots. He's taking more shots. Tyler Hero wanted to start. He's getting to start. Kyle Lowry might not be the Heat's best point guard right now. Gabe Vincent, 8 rebounds last night, had his moments. Kyle Lowry continues to start. Jimmy Butler doesn't want to push himself early in games or early in the season. And Jimmy Butler's being allowed not to push himself early in games or early in the season. And so I just think that the amount of rhetoric sometimes when coaches and players talk about sacrifice, it almost invariably comes down to this. Sacrifice is a wonderful concept for someone else. And I think that's what Eric Spoelstra is working through right now. He has Bam with an agenda. Might not be a bad thing. He has Tyler with an agenda. And he has Jimmy and Kyle with the agenda of, we're going to ease into this thing a little bit. We're 33 and 36 years old, respectively. There will be a time for more. This is not the time right now. So I think that this whole thing is sort of playing out that way and creating questions of how much are you willing to sacrifice. And I'm looking at the chat board right now, and folks, I'll get to as many of these as I can as we go along also. But it's interesting because C. Dollar brings up the whole Victor Oladipo thing. And he says, where is this whole thing? And Kurt, the reason I'm bringing that up is this. Victor Oladipo, to me, was the one who was going to tie this all together. Of course you can start Tyler Hero. You have Victor Oladipo coming off the bench. Playmaker, shot maker, the guy who can trigger other guys also. We haven't seen him at all. So all of a sudden, I think everything is getting mucked up a little. But from what you know, and I know you do a lot of injury updates at Pro Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com, but for our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint, fans and followers right here, when you see how nebulous this whole Victor Oladipo thing is, the opposite knee than the past 4 years, when you see all the time that Victor Oladipo has missed, when you see almost matter-of-factly Eric Spoelstra telling us no new update, and the Heat listing Victor Oladipo is out well in advance, not as typical as they do sometimes also. Kurt, even though we're here on November 2nd and we're less than 2 full weeks into the Miami Heat season, can the Miami Heat in 2022-23, can they, and I'll add a caveat there, should they count on Victor Oladipo?
I don't think they can at this point. I don't think they – look, at this point, isn't he a bonus? Like, it's been too long. It's been too much. I just think you've reached a point where, hey, if we get him back and he can start to contribute like he did for us in the playoffs for a stretch of time, then great. Like, we'll figure out how to use it. But that injury history is long. I mean, Ira, it's like you said, it's 4 years, going on 4 years where he's
4
missed.
years. This is the opposite knee of his surgical knee and his quadricep.
But that's compensation.
Yeah.
That's compensation.
So you talk about, okay, but compensation has its limits. But here's my question to you, Kurt Helin, and everyone out there, and feel free to join us on the chat board here on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint, and it's this. The Heat this offseason had a decision on Victor Oladipo. I'm not saying they had money to spend elsewhere because he was a bird rights free agent, so it's easier to bring him back. Initially, we heard Victor Oladipo is coming back on a 1-year, $11 million deal. Then to get under the luxury tax, they redid that to cover Vic in case he's not fully healthy, 2-year, $18 million year, but a player option on the second year. In other words, if it doesn't work out for Vic, instead of 11, if it's all over, he gets 18. If it does work out for Vic, he gets less than the 11 in the 1 year, but he hits the free agent market and chases the $100 million contract he bypassed in Indiana, or the $70-80 million extension he bypassed in Houston. Did the Heat make a mistake then with their due diligence? This, Kurt, is the part I don't get. How everyone is so matter-of-factly saying, well, Vic isn't ready, but, well, who really thought he was going to be ready anyway? We knew this could happen. Do you buy that, Kurt Helin, when a team offers a player 2 years at $18 million?
The funny thing is, like, that's 2 years, $18 million is below market, like league average salary, right? You are
below
not
mid-level, right? Yes.
Yeah, you're paying him eighth man money, really. Seventh, eighth man money.
And that's what they were expecting. I mean, I know I spoke in the preseason that he might start and there's the chance, but I think we all knew better where it's headed. But that's the exact point I'm saying. Hey, Kurt, look, it's not major money, but it's eighth man money. Like you say, eighth or ninth man money. But you need your eighth or ninth man to play. And when your eighth or ninth man isn't there, it is tangible and it is noticeable, as it is with the Heat this season. You can see the little pieces matter. Dwayne Dedmon was out 2 games. He's a guy making about $5 million, but he mattered. He had a good start. He had 4 points, 4 rebounds in his first 4 minutes. He let you know he was there. So my question is, did the Heat have to start considering a possible Victor Oladipo replacement? Did they just ride Gabe Vincent as their combo guard off the bench? Obviously, they can bring Duncan Robinson for shooting. But in other words, when we do our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint shows every Wednesday, is this just going to be a talking point all season, or at least through the first half of the season?
I think so. And I think if you're if you're Andy and the guys over in the front office, right, don't you have to start looking around the league and thinking, all right, who might we be able to get? I mean, considering the cap situation and the tax situation and where they want to be, who might we be able to get as a bench guy who can come in and play that? And that combo guard off the bench role, that's an increasingly valuable spot. Like it's not necessarily going to come quite as cheaply as with all due respect to Dwayne Dedmon, they don't really looking for a big, but bigs you can get on a mercenary price right now. They're cheap. It's not going to be that way, but you might have to start looking around because you got to have a plan B at this point. Like
you do, and the problem
you got to have a plan B.
Usually you find those guys on teams that aren't contenders that are selling off. It's a veteran guy who's been around a few years, is willing to come off the bench. But here's the problem with all that when you're trying to pick at carcasses. Kurt, are there any carcasses in the NBA at the moment? The teams we thought would be terrible, the Utah Jazz, the San Antonio Spurs, those teams are right there. Those teams are playing well. So I just wonder, are we even close to a point, and I want to get to the Nets in our next segment because there's a lot to touch there, but are there any teams even you're looking at right now and you're saying that team has sold off the season? I mean, I can't see almost anyone, maybe the Orlando Magic.
Yeah.
You could make a sort of, and the guy I would look at there is Terrence Ross. And Terrence Ross has been mentioned for a number of years as a veteran who deserves better than what's going on in Orlando. So maybe that would be my name. But I don't see a lot of other Orlandos and Terrence Rosses out there. So I think you almost have to sit back and wait for more teams to fail.
Exactly. And you brought up the name I was going to bring up and the team I was going to bring up, but we're 6-7 games into the season for teams. Teams really don't make these kind of assessments. And I bet this is going to be true with the Heat. We're talking about them 7 games in. They're going to get to 20 games and they're going to make all right, is Hero working as a starter, or do we need to rethink? Do we need to seriously have this conversation? We haven't seen Oladipo. It's 20 games in, which seems much more possible. Is it time to really have, all right, who else can we get? And by that point, look, the Spurs have a negative point differential. They are not going to live like some of these teams are going to start to come back to earth, and you're going to be able to start to look at them a little bit. Some of these teams, like I kind of think Portland's for real. I don't think San Antonio's for real. I think Indiana will sell you whatever you need. They're
winning accidentally because the Nets suck, so they were able to get that Saturday.
The Jazz are accidentally winning.
Yeah, but the one team I will tell you is when you were mentioning San Antonio, a sort of an intriguing name for me, and please chime in on the chat board here, folks. Josh Richardson is sort of the overaged, him and McBucket's there, the overaged veterans. And I could see if you can make the salaries work, and that's not easy. And the Heat, of course, don't want to be in the tax. They don't want to become hard capped. But I think Josh Richardson's sort of an intriguing name there because he sort of is Victor Oladipo-esque. He can be a 1 or a 2. He can handle. He can play make. He can shoot to a degree also. He's been with successful teams or teams that have pushed in the playoffs. So I think that's a curious name there also as a possibility. Look, I didn't think we'd get through this first 18-minute segment this quick, but at least I know I can leave you with this tease because I want to get to this and get big time in our next segment. Kurt Helin, don't answer now. Don't ruin it for the folks out there. We want them to catch all our sponsors. But is the crap show that's going on in Brooklyn right now going to potentially open a door the Heat were looking at this summer? Could Kevin Durant be on the move? Possibly this time for real. We will touch on that after this break on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel over here. He's Kurt Helin out in LA at the butt crack of dawn, works for NBCSports.com and Pro Basketball Talk. Kurt, it seems like there's a story that impacts the entire NBA because there's just so many tentacles of it. And we were almost waiting for this all summer, the implosion or the start of the implosion of the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah. And there was a point this summer where all of a sudden they said, we're not going to trade Kevin Durant. He's going to come back. And Kevin Durant says, I never really wanted to leave. I love this place. And then they said, we're not going to accede to Kevin Durant's call for a new coach in Steve Nash. And Kevin Durant said, never a problem. Steve Nash said, this kind of stuff happens all the time. Kyrie came back, didn't get his new extension, took the 1-year option. He's going to be in there. Kumbaya. Joe Harris will get healthy. Seth Curry will get healthy. Everything will be great. Claxton's the center they need anyway. And then we've seen what happened since then. There are so many tangents we can get into, and maybe we'll get into all of them in this segment. But I want to start with one because to me, it's the overarching angle for the Heat. To reset this, and we've discussed this several times on redrecover.com Inside the Paint throughout the offseason. The reason the Heat did not get hard capped is Andy Ellisberg and Pat Riley were looking for the whale, looking for the home run. Donovan Mitchell, Kevin Durant, maybe to a lesser degree a John Collins or a Miles Turner. So it wasn't a matter as much of going into the tax. It was flexibility of not being hard capped by offering PJ Tucker the full mid-level. Offer the full mid-level, you're done, you're hard capped. Donovan Mitchell goes to Cleveland. Not a lot of people saw it. Certainly the New York Knicks didn't see it. So if the Heat misread that situation, they certainly were not alone. If the Brooklyn Nets continue on this pattern, whether Ime Udoka comes in or Jacque Vaughn stays or another coach comes in, if Kyrie Irving becomes this ongoing distraction to the point where no one is talking about basketball anymore, but wearing painted messages or T-shirt messages on the sideline. Kurt, you've been following Kevin Durant for a long time, from the Seattle days to the Oklahoma City days to the Golden State days to the Brooklyn days right now. Does this whole thing start all over again? Or do you think that Kevin Durant realized the look was so ugly for him this offseason that he just sits back and let it unfold however it unfolds?
I don't think Kevin cares what you think and I think and everybody in the watching the redrecover.com Inside the Paint show thinks. He isn't fazed by that same way. And the other, and for better and worse, by the way, he wants to play. Look, I think if you've been around him enough to know this, and look, I don't know him that well, but I've been around him enough. The man genuinely loves basketball, loves to play basketball. He is into the game. This isn't something he does on the side while he's trying to start his entertainment business. Right. Like, he loves the ball, and he wants to play, especially as getting later in his career, games with meaning.
Yes.
That's not going to happen in Brooklyn. If this continues this way, and I think it's going to continue this way, or even if they get better, it's mildly better. There are some fundamental issues with this roster beyond who's coaching it and everything else. Like, you are counting on Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving to overcome not good. They're just not a good defensive team, and they're terrible in the paint, right? Like, there's all sorts of stuff. At some point, I think Durant would be willing to go back to Joe Tsai and say, I tried, dude. I tried. I want to be here. Like, I wanted to make this work. you got to get me somewhere. I genuinely believe that's distinctly possible. I don't know that they'd make a deal before the deadline. That's a whole, that's almost separate conversation, but I think it's open. Don't you feel like he'd be willing to just throw this open again?
I do. And again, I think, people are mentioning the trading deadline, which is a long way away, February 8th or 10th, that second week in
9th,
February.
like that, yeah.
And it can get really ugly by then. I think the key dates are the December 15th day when most players signed in the offseason as free agents can go ahead and be traded. It opens a lot of money. For the Heat with Dedmon and Oladipo, you have to wait till January 15th. Still, that's a month ahead of the NBA trading deadline. So I see that as possible. Everyone was lined up in the offseason. But that's why if you deal then, you're probably in a better position for this reason. In the offseason, the Phoenix Suns were one of the teams mentioned on his list, the top of his list, and it was going to crap with DeAndre Ayton, and it didn't look like it was headed anywhere. Then you found out Jay Crowder didn't want to be there. And now the Suns are really good. And the Suns might be the best team in the NBA right now, and having a look of a team that can continue to be the best team in the NBA through the season. I don't know if you break that up. The other team mentioned because of a lot of talent was the New Orleans Pelicans. Well, all of a sudden, they're looking like they have a pretty damn intriguing mix there, Kurt, that I don't know if you want to break up, whether it's Ingram or one of their young players and move in that direction and touch that whole thing for a rental, for a guy who might be unhappy and want to leave after it goes south there and Zion gets injured again and having to deal with that. So I think that option is lost. So again, please, if you're with us, go to the YouTube chat board. Feel free to chime in here. I'll get to as many of these as I can. If you're the Miami Heat, and again, I don't know where it's headed with the Heat. I do think they're headed back to 500 by the start of next week. But would you reconsider Bam Adebayo? Would you reconsider? I know it's a lot harder with Tyler Hero. It would have to be a mega deal. You'd have to put a lot more into that. So I'll just start with Bam. Would you consider that for Kevin Durant, a player who, one, fits totally in the timeline with Jimmy Butler, with Kyle Lowry, but two, when you remove a Bam Adebayo, your future timeline is Tyler Hero and, remember, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Omar Yurtseven are impending free agents. There's no guarantee there. So Kurt Helin, and I know Kurt's going to post and blog on this at Pro Basketball Talk at NBCSports.com as soon as the show is over, so check him out there. Kurt, if one of your readers in a mailbag or in one of your other podcasts mentioned the possibility of, hey, Kurt, I know you do that RedRecover.com Heat show Inside the Paint. I didn't catch it this week. I'm just curious. And now they should catch it. What are your thoughts? Would you consider putting Bam Adebayo into play if Kevin Durant becomes available again?
I don't, only because the goal of getting Kevin Durant at age 33, right? I think 32, 33 is win now, win this year, win in the next couple of years. And you need Bam to do that. You need Jimmy to do that, right? Like, you've got to make them your big three. It's not even about what's next. It's if you're going to win this year, if you're going to win next year with that combo or the next couple of years, Bam is the guy you've got to have in the middle. Defensively, plus can score, close to all the, I mean, we all know everything that Bam can do. I just don't think you can give that up and win. I don't think you're making
Durant,
some huge step forward.
It's Kevin Durant. I don't know where. Yeah. And again, I apologize. I don't know where Kevin Durant fell in your ProBasketballTalk.com rankings, but he's a top 10 player and arguably still, he's having a great season. And arguably still a top 5 player, right?
Oh, no, he is one of the guys. In fact, if you watch them at all, he's carrying them. He is being forced to carry them because last night, they lose to the Bulls. He had 36. Kyrie Irving was 4 points, and they're not
12, right? It's terrible, right?
Yeah. It's almost like he's distracted by something. They're needing him to carry it. I don't question that. I just think if you're the Heat, as great as Kevin Durant is, Bam brings a slightly different skill set that you need around him to beat the Bucks and the Warriors and all the other teams at the very top of the mountain.
Good point. And again, people are, of course, in the chat board are all over this, and I'll get to these in just a couple of seconds. I do know that the Heat cannot trade Bam Adebayo to the Nets as long as the Nets have Ben Simmons, but I think Kurt would agree with me right now, keeping Ben Simmons hardly would be a priority for the Nets if they can get better or they can get future Heat unprotected draft choices, correct?
Or they can get a bag of Doritos at this point.
Okay,
Yeah.
at this point, I mean, a guy who cannot score, who's afraid to get fouled, doesn't want to go to the line, has been passive, and for this great defender, has been a human foul machine to this point.
Yeah.
So I can see all that. I'm going to get to these points right here on the chat board in just a second. But Kurt, I want to cycle back to our thesis right here. Will Kevin Durant be with the Brooklyn Nets after the trading deadline in February?
I'm going to say yes, only because I don't think they really want to trade him. I really think they would just want to figure out how to work around it. And striking those deals are hard to pull off midseason. Those massive, massive trades. And if you're putting in Tyler Hero and everything else and likely bringing in a third team and everything that goes with that, that's just hard to pull off on the deadline in season. They don't happen that much. It tends to be much more straightforward player swaps, even the big ones, just because it's too complex. You need those in the summer.
I want to interrupt you here, though, and put in a caveat. The Brooklyn Nets are unique. They just are. The way the franchise was set up, the way they went for Garnett and Pierce and Darren Williams and tried to instantly become something, screwed that up, gave Boston Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. I get that. That's who they've always been in their history because they're chasing the Knicks like the Clippers have always chased the Lakers, even when they had a better record. So I get that. But Kurt, a year ago, there was a very similar situation to this with James Harden, who made it clear he didn't want to be there. And that was the Nets' big three. And certainly the way Harden has played some this year, you can make an argument that that's the player they needed. So my thought is this. If James Harden could do it last year, I just think there's a chance that Kevin Durant can do it this year.
There's a chance, definitely. But again, that was almost not quite a 1-for-1, but was much closer to a 1-for-1 because Ben Simmons' salary was in that mix, right? So I think it makes it, I don't want to say it's impossible because it's absolutely possible. And that thing could be, that dumpster fire could get really out of control over there.
Right.
It's ugly, and it could get so bad that you've got to restart. That's an already fragile fan base, and without getting into everything going on over there, you've got players chipping away at your fan base already.
I agree. I want to go to the chat board right here. True Extreme says, if Kevin Durant wants out of Brooklyn in a heartbeat, I'd include Bam in that deal. Real quick, just give me your thoughts on these.
Again, I just think you need him to win. I get why you do it, though. Durant is a better player than Adebayo. I just think you need both.
Okay, and some people are talking about the youth factor. Alfredo says you don't trade Bam, no way in hell. Kurt, how much does the age factor matter to you? How much is the hope of having an additional 5-6 years?
A lot, frankly. If you're going older for younger, that's always scary. You're boxing yourself into a couple of years in a rebuild, and that's never been the Heat's way.
No, Greater Good says he doesn't see the value there. Isaiah says Durant would want to play with Bam and Jimmy. Well, of course he would.
I would like to play with Bam and Jimmy.
Works for you, works for me. But if you try to construct a deal with 2 unprotected future picks, I think for the Heat you could do it in 26 and 28. Kyle Lowry's salary, one of your young pieces, maybe a Strus. I'd rather not do that. Vincent Yurtsevin. Could the Nets ever reach that point of desperation where they would do that, where Sean Marks would kick it to the can and start over again and take the quote-unquote picks package?
Maybe, but that's not a Sean. Honestly, at that level, that's no longer a Sean Marks decision, is it? That's a Joseph Tsai decision, and his wife, who, by the way, is I think more involved than people realize in running the Nets. That's that kind of rebuild that has to start at ownership level, right? That's not a
any of those players, and that's why Joe Tsai even issued the statement regarding Kyrie, because he just felt he had to. So it's a management thing here. Two Extreme says, though, we know what player Bam is. He's not going to change. Durant is still an unguardable player, and it's a huge upgrade at his age. Again, that's the one thing. The reason I brought this up on this segment on our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show was this. There were few other teams in the league as willing to live in the moment as the Miami Heat. And the reason I bring it up is, you might say to me, wait a minute, Ira. Any team that has LeBron James lives in the moment. They gave up the Wiggins first-round pick for Kevin Love when he was with the Cavaliers. The Lakers have given him everyone he wants, even though it hasn't worked out. Carmelo, whatever, how he wants. And yet the Lakers, and you're out there in LA, Kurt, they've balked at those 2 unprotected picks. They know that they're protecting themselves to a degree. My thought being, Pat Riley wouldn't be that protective. Pat Riley, 77 years old. Not that his age is a factor necessarily, but he's always been about living the moment. That's why I brought up this talking point. It wasn't to get the clicks, but please smash that like button there. It was more just to say that, hey, if a team might do something like that, I think the Heat is the kind of team that would take a chance with that. It's interesting. Alex goes in here and he goes, I don't want Kevin Durant here. Of all the Nets' problems, Kyrie Irving, every time he opens his mouth, Ben Simmons, every time he doesn't shoot, anyone masquerading as a backup center for the Brooklyn Nets, I sort of forgive Kevin his contre-temps about wanting out and wanting to go somewhere else and leaving Oklahoma City when he was chasing a championship with other players and leaving the Warriors when he already had his championship. People change jobs. People want different things. The one thing about Kevin Durant, and this is, in fact, this is a point I want to sort of wrap this up here with you, Kurt, because I mentioned James Harden. Can you ever see Kevin Durant dogging it? And I'm going to take it a step further because you watch every game on League Pass. Have you ever seen Kevin Durant dogging it?
Not really. I mean, maybe if I've really looked for a game here or there, a defensive possession, but not really. I mean, again, he is a guy who is genuinely passionate about the games in the way, by the way, I don't think you get to be him. I don't think you get to be LeBron. I don't even think you obviously don't get to be Jimmy Butler without a passion for the game that drives you to not lay off like that, not to just Jimmy. If Jimmy's unhappy, it's much more clear. You can ask your friends in Minnesota about that, but it's not, but he doesn't like quit and he just takes the third stringers out and beats you up.
Yeah, no, it just, and the thing is, I think Kevin Durant wouldn't even go to that Jimmy level. Kevin Durant's interesting. As much as he'll attack you on Twitter, on social media, he really wants to be liked and he wants to be respected. And I think that's meaningful to him. So I think when you look at it, it's a little different. Okay, we have just a minute or so here in this segment. I didn't want to get too net-centric, but I don't think you can, in today's NBA, talk too much about the Nets. It's all over the interwebs. Kyrie Irving, if he were to become available, would anyone take him?
Los Angeles, the Lakers would. And I think they that is the guy they throw in two for. What's held them back from throwing in their 2 picks, and you said about protecting the future, it's less that than, with all due respect to Miles Turner and Buddy Hield, how much better does that make them? Ooh,
I know from a basketball standpoint, I don't disagree, but
I think that's what they're doing. I think Kyrie, they think, is the kind of star that changes them.
And you think with the large Jewish population out in LA, that Lakers ownership would put up with that? I mean, we've seen some horrific things in the Southern California area, and you think they would take the baggage to get Kyrie?
I think they would. I think that the fan base would be forgiving enough. I'm not sure. Would Miami's fan base be? I'm curious. So I don't know the Miami's fan base.
Kurt, I got to tell you this. I know we're a little late in the segment. If the Brooklyn Nets were going to come into FTX Arena anytime soon, and I believe their first game here is not till February, I would have recommended a boycott of the arena because I thought his actions have been that egregious. We have a very large Jewish community right here, and I think we have an owner with Israeli ties. There's so much in play here that I think it makes it easier for the Heat. They can worry about that another time and not have to deal with it right now. I personally think Kyrie Irving is untradeable because of the baggage aspect. But you know what? We live in a world where the Nets apparently are about to hire Ime Udoka after what happened in Boston. So I guess in the Kevin Garnett world, you certainly can say anything is possible. Going to get you back to the Heat now. Want to sort of turn it back to end of where we started. The Heat's upcoming schedule. You have Indiana. Well, you have Sacramento tonight. We're going to get into that. Indiana on Friday. Portland on Monday before we do our next show. 2 Charlottes next week. Will the next time Kurt Helin and I talk, the Miami Heat have a winning record and shut all of you on the chat board up? That and more coming up next on RaidRecover.com, Inside the Paint. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun Sentinel. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, and we're doing what we do every here Wednesday, typically at 9 a.m. Eastern for Kurt out there in LA, closer to 6 a.m. Eastern, and we're talking Miami Heat, where this team stands, how things are looking. And Kurt, right now, when you look at the Miami Heat and where they are, and the sky was falling after that loss on Saturday in Sacramento when Sacramento was previously winless. The Heat go out there, go down 22 points at halftime, get within one in the fourth quarter, and sort of fall apart. I want your honest appraisal. When you were looking at what happened to the Heat and coming out of that game at 2-5, honestly, did you say, this is a team in trouble? Something is wrong. The Heat who aren't who we thought they were. What was your take going through the next 2-day break for the Miami Heat?
A lot of what you said actually to end that, which is maybe this team isn't what I thought they were. Maybe that the slow start is indicative of something larger. Am I missing? What did I miss? What am I missing? Is it just shots aren't falling and it's been a relatively tough schedule? Is it what Eric Spoelstra was saying, which is we're closer than, and you wrote about, like, we're closer than it looks. We're better than it looks. Or is there something fundamental there? And I thought that the next few games would give us a better picture. Like you said, the schedule softened up a little. So maybe that would, hey, man, sometimes you just need a slump buster. And the Warriors aren't playing outside of Steph Curry, who's one of those guys playing at an MVP level on a team that's struggling. Everybody else is that is not a team playing at that level right now.
Right. I just, when I looked at the Heat at the start of the season, I just thought we made one key mistake. We looked at the Heat and said 13 players are returning. It's the same team. They finished within one game of the NBA Finals. They won the NBA Eastern Conference regular season. It would all be the same. And Kurt, I think Eric Spoelstra has been really good about pointing to the fact a bunch of people are in different positions. We talked about it in our first segment. If you missed it, go to our podcast here on the Big O Show. Tyler Hero starting changes a lot of dynamics for a lot of people. Yeah. The automatic shooter in the starting lineup, now Duncan Robinson and Max Strus are both trying to do the same thing with the second team. We spoke about Victor Oladipo not being available. We spoke about the hope of Omer Yurtseven. He has yet to play because of an ankle injury. Like Victor Oladipo, he has sort of disappeared. The roles changed. The defense changed. The offense changed. Instead of dribble handoffs, we're seeing a lot more pick and roll. We're seeing a lot more improvisation by Tyler Hero. That's who he is. That's what he does. And I think all those things factored into those early losses. The Toronto loss, I think Chicago, they didn't know who they were on opening night at FTX Arena. Sacramento, I think they still had a little bit of that arrogance, and you see it through the season. We're the Heat, they're the Kings. We can cruise. We're down 22 points. Maybe we can't cruise. They got themselves in trouble. It's interesting. Like I mentioned this at the top of our show, the Heat and the Warriors both left FTX Arena 3-5. And you and I both said at the top of RedRecover.com Inside the Paint, both teams are fine. The Warriors have to find their bench a little. The Heat have to find maybe their defense, not rely as much on zone defense, but they're fine and they can find their way. From here, do you expect a takeoff point for the Miami Heat, or do you still think there's still some things they're going to have to work out?
I don't think it's a takeoff point. If you mean by takeoff point that they're about to go on a 17-4 run or something like that, it doesn't feel like that to me, does it? It doesn't feel like they're so cohesive yet.
They're all that yet. They're all that in a bag of chips. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I don't think they're there. I think they're going to win we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about the upcoming week. I think they're going to win a bunch of games, but part of it is that starting tonight, they're not going to lose to Sacramento without. That is not the same team when
De'Aaron
Fox is not there. Yeah, he's it's the Domantas Sabonis show.
And I'm going to take it a step further, Kurt. If the Heat have any pride in who they are, you do not lose to the Sacramento Kings 2 times within a 5-day span. Because, matter of fact, I'll tell you, we might have to have an emergency RedRecover.com Inside the Paint on a Thursday if they do lose to Sacramento, because then I'll throw everything out the window where the light's coming through behind me, because then my thought will change. You can't.
But by the way, the other part of that is in the East, what we've talked about since before the season. How much time do we talk about spending? Hey, this is a tight conference. You've got to win the winnable games. You've got to win the games you must win. And by the way, Sacramento, they're not as bad as they used to be. That's a blow.
That's a great endorsement right there.
They're not as bad as they used to be, but you've got to win those games. When you get them, when you get Orlando, when you get those teams, you have to get those wins, because you can be sure those teams you're trying to battle for position with will get those wins.
As a matter of fact, it's interesting because there's something about Sacramento I've been noticing for a half a season now, or for a year now, and I wanted to discuss with you, and it's this: when we talk about the Heat and we talk about the rush, you have to make a trade. We have to make a trade. We have to get John Collins. We have to get Miles Turner. We have to do something. To me, Sacramento, made one of those we've got to do something trades at last year's trading deadline. And I posit to you that might have been one of the worst trades in years in the NBA, giving up Halliburton for Sabonis. And I think it has put Indiana on a course of youthful improvement and actually heading somewhere tangible. And Domantas Sabonis is just a guy who will stuff the stats, who will give you those numbers. Honestly, Kurt, because you're out there, you write about trades at the trade deadline at Pro Basketball Talk and NBCSports.com. When that trade was made and they gave up Halliburton, were you as much of a Halliburton fan as I am? Or did you say to yourself, hey, the Kings got to shake it up. 16 years, no playoffs.
I am a huge Halliburton fan, and I am with you. And by the way, I don't think it was just us. You talk to agents and league executives. After the trade deadline, that was one of the big topics. Like, they gave up Halliburton? Was like one of those. It was people around the league were confused. Everybody's high on what he could become. The floor of him as a guy who can run your team efficiently for a decade at the point is really, I mean, that's just an incredibly valuable skill. Look at the Knicks with competent point guard play. Suddenly, like, wow, that's, they look so much better. It just matters a lot. And to give that up for, like you said, a nice player. I don't dislike Sabonis, but he's yeah, exactly. He doesn't defend. They are so desperate to end that streak that they keep shooting themselves in the foot they give up long-term for short-term. It is what the Kings have done. It's the reason they've missed the playoffs. They keep giving up long-term for short-term. They did
okay, so they win today, or else we have an emergency podcast. We call Big O at home. He gets us back on the air, but we'll wait on that. So that's 5. That's 4 and 5, and you're on the move. Then you go to Indy on Friday. Benedict Mathurin. We've talked about rookies. Matter of fact, we're going to see a rookie tonight in Keegan Murray, who's terrific. And you can see for all the people who say, I don't care about Heat draft choices, how you can energize a franchise with the right rookie, especially when it's not the biggest of names. And then you get to ooh and ah because you realize that's why they took Keegan Murray there. That's why they took Benedict Mathurin there. Both guys have been outstanding. Indy has probably overachieved to this point. The victory at Brooklyn, now we know, wasn't the be-all, end-all because they're the Nets. But still, they went into Brooklyn on Saturday night and they won that game. My question to you is, and you're involved with this out there in LA all the time, of course, with the Lakers and the Buddy Hield and the Miles Turner trade. Do you expect Indiana still to blow up those kind of pieces and turn purely toward youth? But when the Simons say we will not be a lottery team playing for ping pong balls, playing for Victor Wembanyama, saying that, Scoot Henderson, the Heat team, the team that the Heat see on Friday in Indiana at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, do you foresee major changes from the Pacers this season?
Yeah, I do. I think that it's funny. I talked to I don't know if I brought this up. I talked to a scout friend of mine earlier who said, you really don't want to get the Indianas and the Spurs early in the season when they're still fresh and care, man. You want to get them later in the season. And Utah. Yeah. I think in Indiana's case in particular, they're walking, you mentioned the fine line. Ownership doesn't want to tank. Management wants to find a way to get ping pong balls. It's going to be a weird balance. But right now, the Heat should win that game, but it's not a gimme. With Miles Turner, with Halliburton, with the guys that Mathurin is playing out of his mind, you have to earn the wins against Indiana. They're playing pretty good basketball right now.
And when Rick Carlisle wants to coach, he can coach. And the reason I say this is, it was a weird moment last week. I've always said, if a coach is missing a game for the birth of a child, unfortunately for the funeral of a family member, of something of that level, I get it. It's just basketball. It's just a game. I've stepped away from my coverage also because that matters. Yeah. When Rick Carlisle missed a road game because it was his daughter's senior night for cheerleading in high school, and I'm like, if the bar is there, and God bless him for being a family man, but Kurt, that sort of tells me that the Pacers are not in on every moment, and that Rick Carlisle really didn't sign up when he inherited Sabonis and thought he was getting that team this year. So I think Rick Carlisle is sort of playing it both ways. He's going to play to win when he can, but I also think there's a part of Rick Carlisle that I don't want to say he doesn't want to be there because I know he loves coaching, but it sort of is an odd, mix there that a guy would miss a game for his daughter's senior cheerleading night.
I don't think I by the way, I think Rick Carlisle might be as good or the best X's and O's, pure X's and O's
Okay.
coach in the league. Like he's really good at that. Is he the guy you bring in for your rebuilding project?
I don't think they thought they were rebuilding. This goes back to what you and I
exactly.
were talking about. Is
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Simon gets you in the room there and he says, we will never rebuild with the Pacers. We will be one and done, but we're not going to quit on a season. So I didn't think he saw this coming.
No, I don't think he did either. And I'm with you. I think he really, it's a good position for him to be able to prioritize other things in his life. So good for him.
And then the one game after that before we talk again on next Wednesday, the Heat will play is Portland. It's weird. The Heat have played all these 2-game sets. Like they literally, last night was the earliest they've ever ended a series against the Warriors. That on November 1st, they're done with the season. Well, today on November 2nd, they're done with the Kings for the season. And next Monday, they'll be done with the Portland Trail Blazers for the season. I know you said earlier in our show you like the Blazers and what they're doing. Of course, without Damian Lillard, they're a completely different team. I would assume that since we're playing the look at the schedule, one loss, usually we do this at the very end of the show, but we've done that now to this point. I would assume you'd have to look at a Heat W in that game based on, one, they beat them in Portland. Two, like you said, they know they can't let certain games get away, and there is no way anyone is looking at Portland right now as a definitive playoff team.
No, and especially, like you said, without Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons is nice. Jeremy Grant's a good player. Like they've got some depth around him, but if that team's going to beat you, it's because Damian Lillard dropped 41, and when he does that and everything else is clicking, they're just tough to beat. I don't think obviously you don't get that. So this is one when you catch teams matters. I mean, everybody likes to say the schedule balances out, but sometimes you catch teams when they're down, and this is one of those games, man. You got to win the games like that.
No, you're right. Look, 2 of the next 3. You're taking the Kings without De'Aaron Fox. You're playing the Blazers without Damian Lillard. You got to make hay. I know Heat players might be out. I do want to get to something here. And a matter of fact, Jose Matos just brought this up on our chat board. I'm not going to use his euphemism for Kyle Lowry, but where would you, Kurt Helin, I'm asking you to rank every NBA point guard from 1 to 30 right now. Not really, but where does Kyle Lowry rank among NBA point guards right now? Is he just a middle-of-the-pack point guard? Or, because that's such a position of strength right now in the NBA, can you almost make a case the Heat, as of now, the way he's playing, have a below-average point guard?
That was actually going to be my comment. I would say out of the 30 starting, and it's nebulous with how you want to define that. Out of the 30 starting, off the top of my head, I'd say he's in the 16 to 20 range, like just below. Like he's just. There's flashes of that guy. There's flashes of the guy you want this season, but that shot wasn't. Finally fell last night. Maybe he's turning it around, but he hasn't been that guy, has he?
No, he's been walking through the games. And the one thing I'm going to be honest about is I did not watch every Kyle Lowry game in Toronto. Maybe he walked through the games there and walked all the way to a championship. I don't know that. I do try to watch an amount of game, and we're usually sitting up higher in most arenas, not at Staples or at a crypto.com arena these days. And I try to see, when is Kyle running? He's a smart, he's a cerebral player. He knows to save it. He's an older player. I get all that. I've seen older point guards do wonders around the league. I can appreciate that. But I just wonder, when we're talking about the Heat's position of strength, if you're really talking about Kyle Lowry as a $28 million player playing, like you mentioned, as a mid-level player, that's a real problem for the Heat right now. There was some talk before the season that the Heat might stretch provision in the last year of his contract if they try to get their books in order. Kyle Lowry right now, can you say something to him, or do you just feel when you're a veteran and you're 36 and you're 16 years into the league that Eric Spoelstra sort of has to be on pins and needles? And I guess even a better way to phrase it would be on eggshells.
Yeah, I don't know that Lowry's an eggshell guy, but it's so early in the season. It's more of a nudge than a pointed conversation, right? Like it's more of a, we need a little more out of you than it is a sit him down, let's have a talk. You know what I mean? Like, because Kyle Lowry's, like you said, he is a smart player. He knows who he is and what he is at this point. I don't think you need to grab him by the lapels and shake him at this point. It's not one of those conversations.
I don't think that would work either. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how he'd take that. Yeah, but he is a motivated guy, and maybe you just need to find a way to light a fire under him this early in the season.
And then one other Heat player, because it's been an interesting sort of ride and a roller coaster, is Duncan Robinson. I thought during the preseason, the Heat were showcasing Duncan Robinson as a trade chip, and he had some pretty good games in the preseason. Then push came to shove, and like Kurt Helin mentioned, in today's East, you can't just meander through a game. You have to play to win. He did not play at all in the second half of the game in Sacramento. They lost. It was go time. Last night, Tyler Hero goes out. Duncan Robinson comes in. He looks like the old Duncan Robinson. He's draining threes, drawing a charge, making a difference, becoming an important player. Duncan Robinson value for the Heat, Kurt Helin. Contributor or trade chip to be showcased?
Well, when Tyler Hero's out, he's obviously a contributor. Obviously.
He said
I
think he's going to play tonight.
I think it's right. And by the way, Drew defenses, like after he hit about 4 threes, suddenly the defense really started. He started to have gravity last night. He really was shifting stuff. I still think he's more of a trade chip. I still think because they're going to bank on Tyler, and even if that means Tyler going back to the second unit, like we talked about, again, as Ira likes to say, go back and on the podcast, listen to the first segment of redrecover.com Inside the Paint. We talked about that. Wherever he plays, I still think he is the player, the piece that if you're going to make a move, he is the guy who brings value back because he's got that $16 million contract, but he's also, as he showcased last night, that is a very valuable skill that a lot of teams could really use right now. And there's a lot of teams that need shooting.
Lakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Duncan Robinson,
exactly.
He might start for the Lakers right now and make a difference.
Oh, God, he would, absolutely.
And that's what brings this whole thing full circle as we sort of wrap it up here today on redrecover.com Inside the Paint. That's why the Victor Oladipo thing plays into it. If Tyler Hero was available yesterday and starting, and Victor Oladipo was available and playing as your lead wing off the bench along with Max Strus, Duncan Robinson very well might not play in that game. So I think you have to take advantage of these non-Oladipo games. I'm assuming there's only to be maybe 5, 10, 15, not 20, 40, 60, and have a chance to showcase Duncan Robinson a little more, that maybe someone bites on him. But what he showed last night, it was a good night for the Heat. They got the W. Duncan Robinson contributed. The Heat got to show off Duncan Robinson as a contributor against an elite defensive level team. So again, folks, that's going to be it for our show this week on redrecover.com. However, if the Heat lose to the Sacramento Kings, we'll be getting Kurt out of bed again at 6 in the morning tomorrow in LA for our emergency podcast. And if that happens, you might have another Heat beat writer, so we'll see. But right now, Big O got all kinds of Dolphin stuff to talk to you about. So the Big O show rolls on.